Look, that burnout itself probably saved my life in some ways and reframe the way that I interact with the world. So I would 100% do it again.
Welcome everyone on yet another episode of Scaling the Unscalable. Today with me is Gerrit. Gerrit is a successful entrepreneur, I would say. He has his fair share of experience in building and running successful businesses. But without further ado, Gerrit, if you want maybe to run a short intro of yourself, what you do, and then let's take it from there.
Cool. First of all, Angel, thank you so much for having me. It's I guess we've kind of known each other virtually for a few years now, and it's great to have the opportunity to sit down and have a chat because I think both of us have been podcasters for a while. It's this is like the most fun thing to do is talk with smart people about fun stuff. So thanks a lot for having me. Yeah. About me, never my least favorite topic to talk about. So I'll try to be brief.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I've been an entrepreneur and a founder pretty much my entire life. I've only had a few paychecks that weren't signed by me. While I was in graduate school, I built my first professional services firm, merged into a larger firm in an acqui-hire, became a partner there, did that for 8 years. And it was pretty great. I was a development economist, so I was traveling all over the world to exotic, unique locations and making a good living and doing fun stuff. But I think like a lot of non-technical people that got into tech, I stumbled upon a problem that I thought could be solved with technology. This was in 2009. Not a great time to build a startup, especially if you need venture capital. Like the whole global economy was melting, it felt like at that time. But I think for a lot of founders, you get this itch and you want to ignore it, but it just doesn't go away. Right. And eventually you feel like you have to itch it. So I sold out of my consulting firm in which I was a partner and built my first technology company, which was Kula.com in 2010. That was a enterprise marketing tech SaaS with a social component. So we turned loyalty points from big brands into tax deductible charitable donations. At the time, we were the largest catalog of nonprofits in the world that you could donate to, about 3 million of them. So anything from your child's classroom to your place of worship to an environmental organization all over the world. And in spite of me making every mistake in the book, from wrong hires and wrong co-founders to throwing away $500,000 worth of code because it wasn't scalable. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have made more mistakes, but somehow it managed to work. So in 2013, I ended up, I guess before that, we had some of the biggest brands in the world using it: Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, JetBlue Airways, Walmart for a while, all sorts of big national restaurant chains in the US, and ended up selling it in 2013 and also really burned out at that time. So
I can imagine.
I mean, I was living out of a suitcase in airports like 200 days a year. I was the primary sales guy at the beginning, and it was clients all over the world. I went from being a competitive athlete to being 15, 20 kilos heavier, picked up smoking. I had all sorts of unhealthy coping mechanisms. I was working 80, 100 hours a week for 3 years straight. And it somehow worked. So sold the company in 2013, moved up into the mountains to kind of reclaim my health and well-being and connect with the things that I love that I hadn't done in a few years. And then as usual, you don't want to sit still for too long. You got too many ideas. I did a lot of things since then. I built a co-working space, a startup accelerator. I started doing some angel investments. And then during that experience, I was working with helping a lot of startups that were having trouble finding engineering talent. Found myself in your neck of the woods, not far, in Skopje in Macedonia, and ended up meeting some talented young engineers that were looking for customers. I had customers looking for engineers. We connected the dots, and Effectuate Apps was born, and that grew into about 30 employees. Eventually sold that. And then I decided to take on a passion project in my mid 40s and moved back to Europe, where my family's from, and did my doctorate in entrepreneurship using wearable devices, basically measuring entrepreneurial performance and well-being.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Then I built a corporate venture studio for a VC fund in the UK, building startups with big multinational companies. I built a longevity clinic in Zurich, in Switzerland, called Ioun. And now, after another break, an important break, to have our daughter, back in the founder saddle again. Lots of other
Okay.
little things in between, but I'm basically just a guy that loves startups and loves the early stage and can't
Yeah.
stop doing it.
That's quite a diverse portfolio from all different industries and then building startups, investing. It's really, really crazy. What's the thing that maybe you enjoy the most from all of these things?
I mean, I love just problem solving.
Okay.
I think it was Woody Allen, the filmmaker, that said every time he took a shower, he came up with a new movie idea. And I feel like that
Okay.
too. I think once you frame the world as problems and
Uh-huh.
solutions, you start seeing more and more of them. And I mean, I have lists and lists of problems that I've thought about tackling. Or, I mean, I've probably had 20 businesses where I put 3 or 4 months in MVP testing the market and ended up abandoning them. But yeah, so for me, problem solving is what I love to do. I like doing hard things. I get bored easily. But I think the other thing I really like is storytelling. I think
Uh-huh.
there are two roles, especially in a startup, but in a company in general. You either build stuff or you sell stuff. And I can't build a lick, so my job is to sell. And to me, the people that sell, whether it's to customers, to investors, or to potential hires, they're great storytellers, and they can paint a vivid, sometimes emotional picture in people's heads. And the way you tell that story is often as, if not more important than the product that you're building itself.
It's much like the saying that you can have the best product in the world, but if nobody knows about it, then does it even matter? So
It's right. There's been this long-standing debate about what's more important, product or distribution. And I think I've flip-flopped on that topic quite a lot over the years. But now, in the world of I think it's actually gone to
distribution,
distribution. Absolutely.
absolutely.
And where you're seeing it incredibly is people that already have communities and have followings, podcasters, media personalities, people that have millions of people following them. They're turning out to be really good entrepreneurs, because when buying eyeballs with ads is becoming so expensive and so crowded, it's the people that already have those ecosystems and communities around them that are able to get engagement. That's why we have movie stars making $1 billion, alcohol companies
Ideas.
or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Because they
Like
have
Ryan
them.
Reynolds.
That's
Yeah.
right. Or The Rock, or all these guys are
Yeah.
doing incredible with this kind of
Sure.
stuff. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely AI has kind of commoditized the whole product building thing. Now you don't like, my personal belief is that you can get to investment without needing a CTO. You can really just bootstrap your product. You can use Lovable or these other AI tools like Cursor, for example, and then you can get that initial traction, that first initial investment, and then of course you need a CTO to scale the whole thing up. But that's kind of pushed for a later stage. And I remember the times when all these founders would be giving out equity for building an MVP, which nowadays just doesn't make any sense.
I agree. But I think it goes both ways. I've recently had this experience where we have a CTO, but nothing else. And what he was able to do in, I think 60 hours of work would have previously taken 4 or 5 engineers months. So I think there are these two approaches, right? You can have some junior people, you can use AI tools, and you can hack together an MVP or a prototype pretty quickly. But if you're doing something more sophisticated, you can also just have a good architect, and they don't even have to code that. If they're good with Cursor, they're using these. I mean, we're using like Vercel and Cursor and these other tools where things, DevOps, why do you need that right now? Infrastructure, almost instant setup, right? So either way, it's become faster, cheaper, yeah, and in some cases better. Definitely better for guys like me that can't actually build it, because we can come up with ideas and problems and be testing it in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, the main problem that I see with technical people or architects going and building the startup with AI is that tech people usually tend to think in solution, like tech solution was the best technology, what's the best way to code the feature. And they need to shift the mindset from the technology to actually building something that people want and that people are willing to pay for. So that's kind of the main problem. And I've also seen that with technical founders as well, because they focus so much on using the best technology in place, right? Making it shiny, making it look really, really nice tech-wise. But then as soon as they take it into the market, then they realize nobody wants it. And then they start saying that building a startup is hard, but it's just different.
I mean, I get it, right? Because there's a lot of friction there. And, I had a company that built software for other companies. And I think one of our competitive advantages were that the leaders of my technical team in Skopje were all very entrepreneurially minded. So they were looking for, how do you get this into users' hands as quickly as possible and not over engineering?
That's nice. That's very nice.
But there's a trade-off, right? Because those engineers are likely going to have to go back, refactor, rebuild, start from scratch, and they just made their lives harder. So I understand why we have this problem with kind of over-engineering, premature scaling of technology, because somebody eventually is going to have to go back and do it right if the company indeed does scale. Problem is if you try to do it too early, you burn through time and money,
Exactly.
and you probably won't get there in the first place.
Yeah, and there is this technology or development advice that says that you never optimize too early. So you want to optimize once you are in the place when optimization makes sense. And usually CTOs love to optimize right away to avoid that technical debt or to avoid refactoring later on. But definitely, I think you need both. Like you used to need both before, you still need both to actually build a successful startup. It's just that you can start right away without needing someone else. And then as you take off, then you can have someone else on board.
That's right.
That's kind of the change. So you mentioned burning out from your first startup. Before going there, I would maybe ask you, if you would get back to 2009, would you actually start the whole thing once again? And if so, what do you do differently?
1000% yes. It was, in hindsight, the greatest time of my life. I mean, it completely changed me, the way that I look at the world, and that burnout itself probably saved my life in some ways and reframed the way that I interact with the world. So I would 100% do it again. I love that I took that big leap and completely switched careers in my 30s and have been on that track ever since. What would I do different is, well, pardon my French, I would do a shitload different. A ton. But, I lecture at universities and I run workshops on like founder health and well-being. And so I've spent a lot of time kind of deconstructing that journey and doing my own post-mortem on my own experience. And fundamentally, I can distill it down to one thing, which is identity. And prior to that experience, I had multiple identities. I was a father, I was an athlete, I was a musician, I was an economist, I was a small business owner, I was a friend and a son. And then when I started building this company, I became a founder. I became an entrepreneur, and it consumed my identity because I lived and breathed it 24/7. And all of my energy and all of my thinking was put into solving this hard problem. And what I didn't realize is that it hijacked everything else. That my son was living with me and I wasn't as present as I should have been. I wasn't spending as much time with my family and my friends. I wasn't exercising. I wasn't doing my favorite sports. Many, many things fell by the wayside because there was this project that required so much of me. And I found myself, I would meet people new, the topics would, hey, who are you? What do you do? And I would say, hey, my name's Gerrit. I'm the founder CEO of Kula. Not, I'm all these other things that make me a whole, complete human. So if I've had one lesson over all the ventures is that it's only part of who I am. So it doesn't define me. And that has real implications for the day-to-day experience as well. Because as you know, the startup journey is up and down, highs and lows, roller coaster ride. And if your identity is tied to that business, your emotions go on that ride too. And as soon as you say, hey, this is one part of who I am, then, you become a little bit more immune to the dynamics of the experience. And it allows you to find meaning and pleasure and joy in other aspects of your life. And it allows you to manage your time a little bit better. It's still hard. It's still the majority of what you do. You still need to be super focused, but it doesn't have to take away your heart and your spirit.
So does that mean that you would work less hours?
No.
Okay.
Not at all. I mean, I find myself now at 51 working a lot of hours, but I work them differently. So I've learned to, you can only optimize for so many things, right? And I think a lot of young founders that haven't done it before are solely focused on optimizing for productivity, right? How many hours can I squeeze out of this day? How much work can I get done in this day? But I think it's not about working longer or harder. It's about working smarter. So what I do now is I've built this model that I call my walled garden, and I do it months ahead on my calendar. And the founders I work with, I get them to do this as well. And what I get them to do is start by listing all of their different identities that matter to them. A young founder I've been kind of advising, I did this with him the other day, and he said, I'm an athlete, I'm a son, I'm a boyfriend to my girlfriend, I'm a founder, I love experiencing the world and exploring and traveling. And he said, all right, write down this whole list, then I want you to prioritize them. Which are the things that are going to be most important when you're 80, 90 years old? List them all out. I said, all right, start at the top and allocate space for that into your calendar. And then take the next one and allocate space for that into your calendar. And do that until you get to work. And then let work fill in everything else. So I do that, right? As sleep is super important because I know I'll perform better. Fitness and exercise is super important. Time with my daughter and my wife are super important. So I put them all in my calendar. And then the rest is left open to work. But I'm prioritizing stuff other than work because there's something called Parkinson's law. I don't know if you've ever heard this term, but it's basically work will fill the time that you have allotted to it. So if you set up your calendar based on what you need to do for work, guess what? It's going to consume all of the blank spaces. But if you start by focusing on family, friends, love, health, and you put that in there first, work will still consume all the blank spaces, but it ensures that you have time and space for the other identities that matter. And that's great for, your emotional health, your physical health, and your overall well-being. And in the end, building a company is at best 5 to 10 years, could be a whole lifetime. And if you treat it like you're running a 100-meter race and not a marathon,
you won't last very long.
That's right.
Yeah, certainly. So I always see the whole entrepreneurship thing as you're running a marathon in the long term, but in the short term, you kind of need to sprint. So it's a long-term marathon composed of daily sprints, if you see it this way. So you have to run as fast as you can each day. But of course, you have to take into account all the other stuff in life as well. Because very often, as you also said, it consumes everything. And I fully understand where you're coming from. So I've done this exercise as well on my own. I did this after reading the book. I believe it is a book called Seven Traits of Highly Effective People, or 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Right. And that kind of introduced the identities thing to me. And I also did that exercise to try to understand, let's say, who I was to different people and to try to balance everything out. Although balancing things is very hard, right?
It is, right? And I try not to balance anything, because every time you try to balance stuff, you have to make trade-offs. And trade-offs are cognitively demanding, and they require brain power. And I need to use my brain power on what matters most. In many cases, that's work, but I also need to be able to be present. So one of the things I learned from that burnout is that, I would see my son every day and I would hang out with him, but mentally, I was somewhere else.
You were not there. Yeah.
That's right. So I need to be able to compartmentalize the heavy cognitive work in these spaces so I can be fully present, in the other places that are really important to me. But it's hard, So, and then the other thing is, you still have to put in a lot of time, right? And so what I used to do, I mean, for a long time, I just worked 7 days a week, and just obliterated myself. And, as the company got a little more mature, I started working 6 days a week, but I was
Okay.
working, 12, 14, 16, sometimes 18 hour days.
Crazy.
And,
Easy
I'm
hours.
in yeah, it's crazy, insane and totally unhealthy and unsustainable. And I wish I had been
Absolutely.
I didn't have a lot of founder friends at that time.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I was building this company in Boulder, Colorado, and there's a famous venture capitalist there named Brad Feld, and Brad Feld founded Techstars, the startup accelerator, and he
Mhm.
then started writing in his blog about mental health for founders. Over between 2010 and 2013, there was this crazy amount of guys in Silicon Valley, that unicorn founders that were committing suicide and having big drug addictions and whatnot. But before that, the whole founder mode, grind it out mentality was the norm.
Mhm.
Nowadays, 15 years later, this next generation of entrepreneurs, I think, is a lot smarter, right? They've heard these horror stories. They're
Mhm.
starting to understand a little bit better that you have to, in order to perform your best, you need to be able to recover your best as
Mhm.
well, right? There's this thing called the growth equation: stress plus recovery equals growth. If you don't have the recovery, you're not going to have the growth. It's like when you're at the gym, if you're lifting
Yeah, it's the
weights,
same.
your muscles heal when you're sleeping, right? So
Exactly.
and I think what a lot of people do is they work really hard Monday to Friday, and then they rest Saturday and Sunday. And what that
Mhm.
does is it puts so much pressure into Monday through Friday that
Mhm.
it consumes you. What I I am very comfortable working on a weekend. I actually love to do that sometimes, I'll work on Saturday or Sunday evening or
Mhm.
something. But what I try to do is I try to amortize that time across the week, because I don't
Mhm.
want to recover on Saturday and Sunday. I want to recover every day. That way I can go into the next day feeling good again, feeling healthy, feeling strong, and ready to perform.
Yeah, definitely. I also saw this, or I also understood this very early on. In the beginning, for the first couple of years, we used to work 16 hours, 17 hours. It was very, very hard. Also because I wa- was doing two jobs in the first couple of years. So I was opening the first job in the morning. I was the team leader, tech team lead there, and then I was closing it and then going to my office until 11, 12 p.m. And of course, that's very unsustainable. So what that kind of created in the company was a culture of overtime. People would stretch their day longer and they would just do less work per hour, but they would just work until 8, 9 p.m. It became very unhealthy. It became very, very complicated to also achieve deadlines because we weren't really measuring things very, very well. We were all in the same office. And that startup feeling, of being a team and building something up, that excitement kind of takes over you. So what I did very early on, I think after 2 years, I just said, we're working until 6 p.m. That's when we close off and we learn how to become productive until 6 p.m. And for me, 6 p.m. meant I go home and then I'm off because I saw myself as an athlete in the business side. So if I'm willing to do this for the long term, I have to really prepare myself to be able to do this for the long term.
I love how you said that I saw myself as an athlete, because that's my mindset too. And if you look at the great athletes, especially the older ones, like, LeBron
Mhm.
James comes to mind, and he spends like 3 million a year on his recovery and his health,
Crazy.
so he can continue to perform the rest of the year. And I think we take that for
Mhm.
granted, right? People, I mean, I was an athlete for a long time, and you eventually see and feel how your body is breaking down and you're not performing that well. But when
Mhm.
you're in business, the signals aren't so clear. They come a little bit later. And, when I was building Kula, the signal that really first
Mhm.
triggered it for me was actually not in me, because I was so focused, right? I mean, you don't grind like that unless you have a real mission that you're on. But what I noticed was other team members that were employees were starting to struggle. And, I always made a point. I said, don't work like me. This is my company. I own 70 something percent of the business, even with the millions
Mhm.
that we raised. And I said, go home to your families. But what I did was I set this tacit expectation.
You
Everyone
set
that
the
came into that
standards.
office, that's right. I was the first person there. I was the last person to leave. They saw me getting less and less healthy and working myself to the bone. And that set that standard that people, even though I told them not to, they felt they had to live up to. So I started seeing signs of burnout around me. And, at first I said, hey, go take a holiday, take a break. And it took a while because as I saw more and more people like that, it took a while for me to realize that actually it's me. I'm the cause of this problem. And if I want to solve it, I have to change the way that I interact.
Yeah, that's such a profound lesson. And I've seen the same. So it's definitely us. When we are in a leadership position, especially in startups or in companies which are very tightly coupled, then you have that impact to people. And it also makes sense because when they see you struggle, they want to help you out. Yeah. So they extend their help by working as much as you do. And that's, I believe, by definition, leadership by example.
Yeah. And it's a slippery slope, right? Because everything, I mean, like I said, I'm 51. I grew up in an era and I grew up in a place where, my father said, you want to be successful in this life, you got to, be the hardest working guy in the room. There's always someone out there working longer and harder than you, right? And whether it was my coaches in sports or my family or my community, that was the message that I got. But I think there's a dangerous path to take that way, especially in leadership positions. It is, right? And if maybe you can cover for it for a while, but if you have a growing company around you and you infect the company culture with that mindset, you are at risk of everything falling apart around you quickly. And the path to that decline is painful for everybody.
All right. I fully agree. 100%. So maybe let's talk a little bit more about that burnout phase. You mentioned that you went to the mountains and you took some time there. Can you maybe describe what that did for you, how that phase changed Gerrit into maybe who you are today?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I was terribly unhealthy, and I got 9 acres in the mountains on a river. So I used to be a competitive whitewater kayaker. So I went to one of my happy places, which was on a beautiful river where I could take my kayak in my backyard and paddle 15 kilometers into town.
Love that.
Great whitewater. And I was also like gardening and running around barefoot and hanging out in the sun and playing with my dog and really just trying to slow life down because the pace at which I operated was just far too fast. And I actually had a pretty profound experience. So I'm pretty competent at this sport. So I did things that I would never tell anyone else to do, which is go kayak a whitewater river alone. But it was my backyard run. I knew it so well. And one day I hopped in my boat and I started kayaking down the river. And I got to the end and I got out of my boat and I had this scary moment that I had no memory of anything that had happened in the previous 90 minutes. Nothing. It was like a blank.
90 minutes.
Yeah, like nothing. Literally, I had no recollection of anything. And I got kind of scared. And then I just kind of chalked it off. I blew it off. And then about 2 weeks later, it happened again. And I was talking to friends and doctor. I was like, I had a stroke. Like, is something wrong with me? So I started researching it. I had the time and I started digging in deeper. And I remembered a book I had read years and years before by a Hungarian Croat psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And Csikszentmihalyi is one of the fathers of positive psychology, and he coined the term flow state. So I opened up the book again and I started looking into it and immediately realized that there's this possibility that could have been a really immersive flow state, because what happens when you're in this state of flow is, you're so focused on a task. You're not really thinking, right? You're reacting to the environment and time starts to transform. So what happens is, the front of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that's our logical, analytical brain. It's also our spatial awareness, sense of time, things like that. And interestingly, you think when you're kind of performing at your best that your brain is working really, really hard. It's actually not. It's actually the hindbrain that turns on during flow and the prefrontal cortex downregulates. It's what's called transient
Mm-hmm.
hypofrontality. And I
Okay.
immediately started to understand that that's what was happening. I was doing the thing that I loved the most. I had a very clear goal of surviving going downstream. I was, just in so deep in this
Mm-hmm.
immersive experience that I didn't really have any working memory of the experience. And then you get out and you feel great. You're like, oh my God, that was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I feel like $1,000,000. I know I did really well. I performed really well. I feel really good. And I started putting those dots together that, okay, wow, I'm having these really incredible flow states. And then I started to ask myself, well, what the hell? Like, why
Mm-hmm.
aren't I having those when I'm working? Why did I just have a burnout, like the worst kind of burnout? And now here I am, I get back to the river and I have this flow state. And one of the characteristics of flow is you have to have what's called an autotelic experience, which means
Mm-hmm.
there's meaning and purpose. Like this is something that you genuinely love to do. But I said, hey, I
Mm-hmm.
also love to build businesses. I love to be an
Yeah.
entrepreneur. And I got kind of obsessed with this topic that I would like,
Okay.
how can I find that same experience that I get on a river
In
or
business.
snowboarding? How can I get that in business? And I realized nobody had ever studied that before. So I
Okay.
thought about writing a book. We went to
Mm-hmm.
Southeast Asia for a few months and I was like, I'm going to write a book. And then I ended up meeting this professor who was also a
Mm-hmm.
former whitewater kayaker here in Germany.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What
It
are
was
the
a
odds?
random connection. Yeah. And he said, this would be an interesting doctoral research. Why don't
Uh-huh.
you consider doing a PhD? And initially,
That's nice.
my first thoughts were, I'm 45 years old. No way. What is a doctorate going to do for a lifelong entrepreneur? But,
Yeah.
I have family in Germany. I thought it'd be nice to be home. I really wanted to tackle this problem. And lo and behold, I became a mid 40s PhD student. So
Congratulations.
yeah, it was a fun journey. It also happened through COVID, which was fantastic because
Okay.
what else were we going to do during COVID lockdowns but read a lot of
Yeah.
papers?
Slow times.
But yeah, so that little time in the mountains was not only great for my health. I mean, I met my wife there as well,
Okay.
but yeah, it kind of set a path that was unexpected. This other little small life pivot to another part of the world, and just a new framing about how we build businesses and how we can. I'll say one thing. I feel so blessed. I recognize, like, I'm talking about first world problems here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have this idea to build a company. Somebody gives me millions of dollars to try to build it. And
Yeah.
I worked too hard and I got burned out. Like I recognize the
The
ludicrousness
privilege. Yeah.
and the huge privilege that comes along with that. But nevertheless, like I think whether you're building a small business or you're working on a career, you're just trying to keep a job, that
Mm-hmm.
it's such a big part of our life, our work life, or it might even be raising children, like, which is a job too. Like our work
Mm-hmm.
life takes
Agreed.
up such a big amount of our time, at least a quarter of our life.
Even
And
more.
yeah, for people like you and I, probably substantially more. But it's so important to have meaning and purpose and joy in that experience.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a lawyer for a big oil company. He made decent money. We grew up
Mm-hmm.
middle class, but he hated it. He hated getting up and going to work and putting on a suit every day. He never complained, but he hated it. And I remember I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I remember at a young age that I did not want to do that. And it wasn't about being a lawyer, or wasn't even about working for an oil company, which I wouldn't do
Mm-hmm.
anyways, but it was about, my God, this man has such a lack of joy and such a big
Yeah.
amount of his time. And here I am now looking back, and I've spent most of my career doing things that bring me joy. But if I don't have the tools and the frameworks to be able to manage that experience effectively, it can start to slip away. And
Mm-hmm.
that is, all of a sudden, all of this privilege doesn't feel like privilege anymore. And yeah, that's a missed opportunity. So that became a bit of my life purpose and passion.
Yeah, my business partner, Manuel Kulman, which you know very well, he mentioned that entrepreneurs very often get stuck in a golden cage. So we create a business and then we start executing the business. And what happens is that the business becomes so much reliant on us that we can't actually escape the thing, and we feel stressed and we feel burned out. And then everything starts spiraling down. And I remember I had a moment very similar to this in 2023, also living a tough batch back then. And for me, it was like 9 years, 8 years, 9 years doing the same thing. And of course, you grow tired because if you do the same thing and down the path, you kind of also forget why you started in the first place. So you had a motivation, maybe you had a mission, you wanted to build something or fix something in the world, wherever that was. And then it becomes a job. So very often becomes a job, and we don't really learn how to fire ourselves from the job. So for me, it was a moment of understanding whether I still wanted to do what I was doing, and if yes, under which conditions. So I had some conditions for everyone around me, for the business, on how it had to be shaped up, on the relationship also with Manuel, which we discussed, and we were able to actually make it very smooth. And also on the objective that I wanted for myself, because honestly speaking, the whole objective had shifted so much that I wasn't working for something I wanted to actually work on. I was working on whatever was coming to me. So I had become reactive rather than proactive. So I do understand that feeling of, being stuck and needing to recharge. And even like I have always recharged in terms of time. So I've never worked uh 70, 80 hours. That has never been me.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. But what you touched on, Angel, I think is not discussed enough. And it's one of the things that came out of that experience for me, which is my goal is obviously to build something successful, but my goal is also to work myself out of a job. I early on in my career, I was too young, too immature, and I had too much ego. I wanted to lead and grow a company to success. And
Yeah, I
now I
know
don't
the feeling.
care about that as much. I care more about the journey than the outcome. I mean, sure, I've had a little bit of success, but I certainly want more, and the outcome is still important. But in the end, I've had these catalysts that have made me kind of reflect on who I am and what I want in life. Unfortunately for me, I love 0 to 1. I love the early stages. I love that grind. I love the uncertainty. I love the complex problem solving. It's not exactly the place to make the most money, but it's also, but for me, it's the place that I love. So I also know what I'm good at. I know I'm good at leading companies when I can put the whole company around a big table or have everyone in a small room. Once I get above 30 employees or so, I start becoming more of a manager, and I'm not that good at that. So I always find ways to be most effective in my danger zone and then try to get out of it as quickly as possible. And that requires a bit of detachment from ego. And I think a bit of an understanding of who you are and what you're good at. And unfortunately,
Awareness.
Yeah, that awareness. And unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to find that awareness in the middle of the journey. And I think that's why first time founders are not on average as successful as people that have done it before, because they've had those postmortems, they've had those times to reflect and say, okay, now that I'm detached from this, I can look back and say, this is what I was good at. This is what I wasn't. This is what I liked. This is what I didn't. But if you're you're going through this the first time and you don't have those answers, it's hard not to have that struggle.
Yeah, you have to learn those lessons from somewhere. Otherwise, it will be very, very hard. So yeah, it's funny that you mentioned it. It's actually quite interesting because I have lived a very similar thing. In my perspective, we've had always these ups and downs, and I've always had myself run an introspection, try to understand what I was good at, what I wasn't good at, where the things had failed. If a customer had left, why had it left? Was it something that we could have done better, something that I could have done better, or the team? And having these frequent introspective sessions also with yourself kind of helps you to ask maybe the tough questions to yourself. And you do realize then beyond that ego that I fully believe every founder has, because otherwise you won't be able to get anywhere. But beyond that unhealthy ego, then you start realizing your own limitations. And what I realized, for example, in that 2023 moment, which I think it was the deepest moment I've had, was the fact that, like you also said, I think I'm very good at entrepreneurship, at finding gaps and at finding solutions to certain problems. I have become a fairly good leader and an okay manager, right? That's how I would scale it. But I definitely hate management. And whenever I'm lacking something, it's all about management. And I'm not the most natural born leader in the sense that I would rather work on finding that gap in the market rather than lead the team. I've done that. I can do that. It's fine, but it's more like a second thing. So there are three different skills: entrepreneurship, leadership, and management, right?
That's right. You know, very rarely, it's kind of like that old adage of like, you can have it, what is it, fast, cheap, or good, choose two. I
Yeah.
think it's kind of the same entrepreneurship, leadership, and management. You can't have all three, but you can have two. There are the occasional, rock stars that
Yeah.
can do all three. But then it begs the question is, do you enjoy all three? And is it your ego telling you yes? Or is it authentically all three of those things? Because when you break them down in experience, and you and I have done them both, sometimes they're kind of opposing one another, and
They are.
yeah, I prefer the entrepreneurship and leadership side of things. I always think of that. What is it? You can have quality, price, or speed. Choose two, right? You can only choose two. And I think that
The
the same,
triangle.
right. And I think the same adage might apply between entrepreneurship, leadership, and management. You can kind of have two of them because some of them are somewhat oppositional, right? Like it's very, very difficult to love being an entrepreneur and also love being a manager because I think there's
It's
different
different skills.
systems and mindsets and skills that go along
Yeah.
with it. Now, sure, they're the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world that go from, the basement to the giant boardroom of a public trillion dollar company. But I think,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe that's ego. Maybe there are people that really just love doing all of those things, or maybe their roles evolve over time. I don't know if a guy like Zuckerberg feels like an entrepreneur anymore or a chairman CEO. But for me, like I know what I like. I like the small team, the fast speed, and the difficult problem solving.
Creativity.
I had Steve Blank on my podcast a few years ago, and he talked about, exploration versus exploitation, right? Big companies are great at
Okay.
exploitation. That's like capturing market share, increasing revenue, increasing net profits, like optimization. And then there are the explorers, the ones that are starting with nothing, finding problems and creating innovative
Who
solutions
find
for
new
them.
lands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the explorer side to me is fun. That's where I want to play. If I'm spending my days trying to figure out how to carve out 2%, on our net profit margin, I would much rather leave that to someone who's more capable and more talented than I am.
Yeah, I totally feel you. And I believe it's also like a certain trait that us entrepreneurs share. They will love to build things from scratch and to start all over again. And usually that happens when something more shiny comes up. And I've trained myself to think away of those things because I believe that those are distractions. And if you're running something, a business or an entrepreneurship, it's very easy to lose track and to go to a different direction because what you're doing has become hard or harder. So to actually scale a business, like we have reached a certain size and we are the same size for 3 years now. And I fully believe that that moment of thinking and introspection I had back in 2023 was also coupled with the fact that I thought I wasn't able or I didn't know how to take it to the next level and also how to solve back then's problems. And yeah, basically I just set a plan and I executed the plan and now we are still like we've resumed slowly growing. So it's a matter of mindset. And I don't really like running away from hard stuff anymore. Maybe when I was younger I used to, but now no longer.
I feel but I think there's a difference too, right? This is using, very maybe American numbers, but making your first million in a company is hard. Making your first 10 million is way harder, right? Then going from 10 million to 100 million starts getting easier again, right? So
Okay.
there's this bell curve, right? And I think a lot of it depends on, in the early days, that first million's hard. It's you, maybe some of your mates and a small team really trying to figure out product market fit and
Yeah.
getting that growth flywheel starting to go. 10 million gets really hard because you're not a big company yet. and you're still a relatively small
You're
team.
still
And
in between.
that's right. You're trying to take this big leap, right? Once you hit that 10 million mark, now you got the resources, you're hiring the top talent, you're getting the McKinsey guys or the ex-Google engineers or whatever. And now you have all of these resources around you to get to that next level. I don't know if it's a matter of being hard, but I think it's a matter of, for me, it's creativity. Like that's what I love, right? I like lateral thinking, creative problem solving. I mean, I'm a numbers guy. I can get into such a flow state just playing with Excel, but when you're looking for small optimizations rather than big levers that you can pull, that's just less exciting for me, and I think in the end, don't give up when it gets hard, because that's where the magic is. And for me, I would say like the greatest thing that's happened to me, there's big trade-offs in making entrepreneurship a career. There's so much cool stuff that comes out of it, but there's so much uncertainty. My life has been make a good amount of money, make no money for a while. Make a good amount of money, make no money for a while. It doesn't work very well if you're trying to pay a mortgage or grow a family or do these other types of things. But the experience of being, I lost my train of thought there a little bit, but the experience of being an entrepreneur for me is that I get to be creative, right? I get to look for innovative ways, taking two distinct concepts and finding how they come together. They're more difficult, complex problems, and that's what I need to stay engaged. If I'm spending a week trying to figure out how to shave, 1% off my cost of goods sold, like I'd rather give that to someone that likes that. Yes, but some people love that stuff, right? And good. I would be more than happy to have them on my team, but I'm at the point now that I know what I.
Yeah, definitely. I fully agree with you. And again, it all comes down to whether you are someone who likes that kind of stuff, that small detail thinking, or whether you are a big picture thinker. And also one of the traps I see is that we start as big picture thinkers, then we start fixing details and those small margins that you mentioned earlier. And it's hard to get back to being a big picture thinker, right? So how have you done it when you were an entrepreneur?
I'm not sure that I did, but since over the past 10 years, I've now coached and advised close to 1,000 founders. And I think I've learned more from advising other entrepreneurs than maybe I have through all of my businesses. I mean, there's a reason, right? You see so many different business models and so many different personalities, but you also get to parachute in, once a week or once every 2 weeks. Here are my biggest problems. What I realized over that time is that, we get so deep into problem solving, right? And the kind of metaphor we use in English is you get really deep in the weeds, right? You're down low on the ground looking for these minute details. But the really great entrepreneurs are the ones that can go down into the weeds and then zoom out and go to 10,000 meters and look at the whole landscape, find the problem, and then zoom right back down
Zoom in again.
So I think that this is, I learned this by accident, I would say, but I think it can be taught. And it can even be their heuristics and systems we can put into place, especially for leaders, to say, all right, every sprint, every week, whatever it might be, zoom back out, look at the big picture, assess the market, assess the competitors, look at the customer landscape, look at all your data, try to imagine the path that you're going on. Because such a big part about building a business is not the absolute number. I'm at K revenue. Right? It is the trajectory. It is how steep that curve is, right? So the great entrepreneurs are really good at extending that curve and seeing what direction it's going. And it doesn't just have to be revenue, right? It could be tech debt, it could be product, it could be the culture of the team, it could be the market. And just being able to zoom out back enough and say, this is my trajectory, this is the direction I'm going. And I think it's particularly important for the founders themselves, the ones that have a lot of purpose and mission, because you go into a business and you have all this mission that you want to accomplish. And the deeper you get into it, especially if you're taking outside capital or you're growing your team or you're bringing on co-founders, you may look up one day and you realize the goal that you were aiming for is now somewhere off in another direction because you've been grinding for so long and you didn't look up to see if you were still on track. So I think you
That's so
can
true.
really learn a lot by building in this mindset of periodically, I need to zoom out and look at the big picture, then go back down and grind on the little problems again. And I think that's what makes the difference between good entrepreneurs and really, really great ones.
Yeah, you have to kind of learn that. So it's not something that comes natural. I try to do that every month or so, where I just try to look at the big picture. I try to write a few things down, try to analyze things from a whole different perspective. Because when we see things from our perspective, then of course that's limited. When you start seeing things from a different perspective, then of course you gain, I believe, a better understanding. But that comes with experience. I definitely didn't do this for the first 5-6 years.
Yeah. Same. And what I tell younger entrepreneurs is a great way to hone that skill is go mentor others. One of the big things for me when we moved back to Europe was I said, I'm going to start saying yes to everything. I started mentoring at accelerator programs and incubators and at university startups and anyone that I possibly could so I could get as much exposure. Of course, it's great for building a network, but it's also great for honing your craft. And I've spent the past few months setting up an accelerator program in the Middle East and in a region that doesn't have a lot of resources.
It's very nice.
And I've been asking young founders here, hey, come on in and mentor for a session. You're going to see 8 different businesses. You're going to have to look at it from a big picture perspective. They're dealing with the details. You only have 15 minutes. So they're going to give you the big picture and you're going to have to respond to that. And that skill set of seeing different problems, all these different problems and different challenges for different types of businesses, it forces you to operate at a high level and try to solve problems at a high level. And I think you do that enough, you're going to gain skills that you won't get just working on your own business. And I mean, Angel, I think the podcast is the same thing, right? You talk with a founder about their businesses, like you're getting to parachute in for an hour, get exposure to these things. And, you'll see that there's a lot of challenges that exist across all businesses. And then there's some that are unique to that specific context. And operating at that high level enough, especially for guys like me that just enjoy that high level problem solving, is a good tool to add into your toolkit for when you are working on your own.
That's very, very interesting. I've done some mentorship myself, but for the last couple of years, I'm just saying no to everything that I consider a distraction. So if I'm to reach the goals that I want to reach with Division 5, with my company, with a podcast, or whatever I'm doing, I've also learned through time that focus and clarity are maybe the 2 most important things an entrepreneur can have. Clarity on understanding where you're going and what you actually want to achieve, and focus in being able to say no to things that could be interesting but maybe not really helpful towards the direction you're going.
I 100% agree. Focus and clarity are everything. But I'll add a piece, right? Because what makes an entrepreneur different from a manager oftentimes is creativity and creative problem solving. And one of the inputs for creativity is novel experiences, right? The great artists and musicians of the world, these great musicians are spending their free time listening to African tribal music, or, artists are exploring, looking at nature and the way trees form, right? So we need to stay creative we need new inputs, right? We need new input data. If we're only focused on one thing, it's very difficult to get our brains to see what's happening around those things. So practicing integrating novelty into your life. You don't have to do it a lot. I think you can still have focus and clarity, but allocating a little bit of time to say, hey, I'm going to go focus on someone else's problem, or I'm going to have an outlet of art or music or whatever there. I'm going to spend time in nature. Everyone has their muses, but I think having something other than that pure focus on one thing is what's keeping those creative juices alive. Like I find I get so deep into business, sometimes for me, it's just a walk in nature, no music, no nothing. And I'm looking at the light shining through the trees or feeling the soft forest floor of my feet. And that brings ideas. We've all done this before, right? You're trying to remember something, you forget a word or you forget a
Yeah.
concept, and no matter how hard you try, you forget it. And then 2, 3, 4 hours later, you're doing something completely different, shopping in a store, out on a walk, and it comes to you, right? And it's because we're bringing in all of this sensory data subconsciously, and some of that sensory information will trigger those moments. So I agree, be focused, have pristine clarity, but also be open to other data that is swarming around you.
Yeah, I love that. It's really great. And definitely I find myself the happiest or the clearest, with my mind and my head being the clearest, let's say, when I'm in nature or when there's silence around me. So either in the night, that's like a great time to be able to sit with your thoughts and to understand what you're doing and if there's something you can do better and maybe think of different ideas, or in the nature, as you also said, without music, without necessarily things that can distract you from that whole experience.
I
So
love that.
I do agree.
That is such the engineer's brain. I love it. It's like, just get out of my way and let me do my magic. And I'm that way too in a lot of ways. But I also, my other tool is I have, over the years, I've acquired great relationships and friends and peers that do totally different things, but I value so much. And I also find a lot of value out of talking through problems with people that are not involved in it. One, it teaches me to distill the information down very concisely and communicate it very effectively, which is kind of core to what I do as a founder. But it also brings in perspectives of people that otherwise wouldn't. My wife is a neuroscientist and she knows nothing about business, and she doesn't care about business. Every once in a while, I'll talk to her about something and she'll just have a little snippet of something that I never would have thought of before. So I feel when I look back on life, all of my people that I'm closest with in the world do all sorts of things, like an electrician, a hydrologist, a child's musician, a successful founder, a VC. Like, they're very, very different. And I think the more diversity we have in our circle, the more we're going to find,
The better it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's this political movement about having more diversity, right? We need more diversity. We need more women. We need more minorities participating. And I couldn't agree more. I 100% agree with that. But I think diversity has a much more utilitarian side, especially in the entrepreneurial world, which is the more different ways of thinking and doing that we have in our orbit, around us, on our teams, the more diverse people we understand, the more people we can reach effectively, the more unique skill sets and ideas can be brought into the equation. So I'm a big believer is I want a company that looks like the United Nations, right? Because then I've got people around me that understand different parts of the world, the way different people think, and they can bring in ideas and ways of interacting and connecting. So I try to practice that in my life, not as a political statement, but very much as I learn more
as a
and
way
I
to
can be
live
better.
your life.
Exactly. It just makes me better at what I do.
Yeah, you can definitely learn from everyone, because everyone has a certain perspective that we certainly don't have. So that's a great thing to try to have. I still think that companies either way need to not hire with the focus of diversity, since we went into this topic.
Yeah.
Because if you make that your focus and you start, discarding great candidates because they are not diverse enough, then that's a big trap, and that's where you don't really need to fall to. But if you find a great candidate who is diverse and who can add something extra to your culture or to your team or to your company, then you should definitely go for it.
That's right. And, it's not just the color of your skin or your gender, right? It's just your life experience. You could have a
Agreed.
kid that grew up with millionaire parents, or you could have someone that grew up with nothing, and I want a little bit of both. I don't care if they're white, brown, black, male, female, gay, straight. What I care about is they look at the world through a different lens. And that is super valuable for people that are trying to connect with the world and, build a customer base or solve problems for as many people as possible.
So would you say that this would be very important for companies who would operate in multiple markets?
Definitely, definitely. It's I've built companies in 3 different countries. And the first thing I've learned each time is I need to surround myself with people that are grounded and rooted in those places in some capacity. I can bring a lot of value from the outsider's perspective. That's hugely valuable too. But you also need the insider's perspective, right? I learned that being a development economist, right? Like the UN would send me to post-war Liberia or the West Bank of Palestine or, rural Uganda. And I'm a 194 centimeter white guy, male and white. And of course I'm an outsider. And it's important to build relationships of trust. And that means, being very humble in, hey, I probably bring something unique to this equation, but all of my great ideas mean nothing if they don't connect with the people and the place. So yeah, I think it is super, super valuable. And no matter what we do,
Great, amazing. What would you say that's the focus for Gerrit nowadays and in the future? Like, where are you more focused into? Is it your investment? Are you thinking of starting a new startup? What's taking most of your day?
Well, my number one priority is being a father. I have a
I love
16-month-old
that.
daughter, and I also have a son who's grown up. But that is the most important startup of my life, and it's the one that it has to succeed. And so all
Okay.
of my heart and love goes into that, and my wife and my family. That's first and foremost now. I'll never make that mistake again. But once a builder, always a builder. I can't help myself. So I'm actually back in the founder saddle again in the early days. I've learned that I don't try to build the same business twice or even a similar business twice. And I probably should. Most of the data says founder market fit, solve things that, you're good at. But for
Yeah.
me, I like solving problems that I've experienced. And right now, the world is changing so much. Technology is changing so much. And I'm such a non-technical nerd that I'm so excited about all of the opportunities that we have. And I'm excited about building companies with a totally different paradigm. It's how we started this conversation, right? It's like how quickly, how differently,
Sure.
but the mindset is different too, right? It's not the same lean startup playbook anymore. It's evolving and changing so quickly. Venture capital is changing, recruitment is changing, how we hire people and company culture is changing. And it's so exciting and fun to be a part of that. So I decided to hop back on the bus, playing actually in the immersive 3D space, AI space, which is super fun. So we're working with
Okay.
Gaussian splatting. I don't know if you've heard of that concept before.
No.
It's basically rendering 3-dimensional objects from 2-dimensional data, or even textual data
Okay.
in a commerce environment. So we're about 4 or 5 months into
E-commerce.
that. Yeah, basically creating an
Okay.
immersive commerce experience. Yeah, you can
So
think
like a
of
3D.
kind of Google shopping in 3D. So
Okay.
more like a search and discovery in 3D.
Uh-huh.
And what wasn't possible just a few years ago, now the emergence of these 3D reconstruction models, I believe the internet's going to
That is so
fundamentally
nice.
change. Yeah. Yeah. And fast and high quality. Yeah. So I believe we're seeing a sea change. And
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that I want to zig when everybody's zagging. So please build your agentic startups. They're certainly useful, and I use them, but I want to go a different direction. I'm
I
looking
love
at.
that so much.
I mean, I probably said the same thing 15 years ago. Go ahead, build your marketplace, bro. But that's not where I'm going. But
Yeah,
yeah,
some of them built some huge marketplaces, by the way.
100%.
I
There's
did
a
very
few times
well.
I probably would have kicked myself. I kicked myself for not. Yeah, I'm also money's nice, but that's not the motivator.
Yeah.
I know if I am just working for the money, I don't have the mission. I lose interest. So it's building beautiful, cool things that solve problems for a lot of people. So I don't know if this one is the answer, but it's the answer right now. I don't ever intend to stop doing this. I don't believe in retirement. If you want to retire, you're probably not doing what you love. I want to do this as long as I possibly can. Probably maybe on different terms as I get older, but right now I'm still feeling, thanks to having a little one at home, I'm feeling pretty young and pretty energized.
Yeah, that's very, very nice. So I didn't know you were in the 3D space. Like I've been personally in the 3D space for quite a long time. We have a department called Division 3D here internally where we work with companies mostly building 3D solutions for the web. So we've done that since 2017. We've worked with companies such as Bytro in Germany. We've worked with Verizon in the US. Back in the pandemic, they wanted to build this 3D virtual event space, and we were one of the contractors. We've built 3D games for startups in Canada, in the US, in China as well. So we've been quite involved. And it's quite interesting to see that you are investing in that space because I believe you are in the browser, right? The
Yeah.
e-commerce solution. Yeah.
Yeah. So now we have, well, soon, if not now, I have researchers from postdocs from universities starting to work on it with us. It's
Okay.
so immersive worlds. Now imagine that you can create that from a two-dimensional image in a rich, deep context environment in seconds. And that's what
Yeah.
nerfs, Gaussian splats are enabling us to do. And compute's getting cheaper, it's getting more effective. And I think what, people have been thinking about the metaverse and AR and VR for a number of years. The idea was right, the technology wasn't ready. And I think we've just had a few breakthroughs in the past 18 to 24 months that are about to
Okay.
change the game. And of course, that combined with generative AI is what makes it possible. Gosh, throw some quantum in there and our whole world's going to look like that soon.
Quantum definitely speeds things up. So I'll just ask one more question on this topic and then I will let you go because I'm very interested in the topic.
Yeah, we might need an
I've been very
offline on this
invested.
one.
Yeah, sure. But I still want to kind of challenge it a little bit. The main problem I've seen personally with customers building 3D stuff on the web is that the web by itself or the experiences on the web by itself are not optimized for 3D. And us as humans, we are just better at navigating through this stuff in terms of websites or in terms of e-commerces. It's just faster and it gets us the information quicker. But 3D worlds tend to overcomplicate even the simplest task. So just trying to understand also your point of view. How are you kind of tackling this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I'm certainly new into the space, but I would say there have been some changes. Like, first of all, now we're able to create these browser-based experiences in beautiful resolution, right? In really, really high quality with good frame rates. So it feels much more natural than ever before. But I think the way humans interact with computers is changing fundamentally too. And yeah, in the past, when you had to drag and drop stuff and you had to navigate around with a mouse or your keyboard, people are now becoming much more conversational with their devices. And AI has enabled us to semantically interact with 3D worlds. And we're seeing it already. Just look at basic search and discovery on the internet. Every month, the LLMs are doubling market share away from Google.
True.
So, and more people are doing it conversationally. Like about a month ago, I installed Whisperflow. I don't know if you've used that tool. It basically turns your entire computer into voice. You can pretty much do everything without a keyboard now, and it's punctuated and capitalized perfectly. It understands everything. And I think this is where we're heading. And you see it with young people, the youngest generation already. They're much more comfortable. I mean, hell, the TikTok generation, they talk to I really would struggle talking into my phone and making a video, but I'm also twice those people's age. But I think we're getting to a time where people are interacting with devices much more in a completely different way than ever before. And the technology is being forced to catch up to that. Will it stay in a browser environment? That I'm not so sure of. I mean, we're seeing some pretty big leaps with the glasses.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know if the goggles are going to remain. the Oculus type goggles are going to
The
remain.
VRs, you mean?
Yeah, the VRs, but I think the AR experiences and these hybrid experiences are only going to get better. I mean, there's companies that are
Meta
working.
glasses.
Yeah, they're in the early days. I think now, was it Huawei or one of the Asian companies has taken it already to the next level. There seem to be a lot more coming out there. So I don't know if we're always going to be looking at our screens, but I think in the end, you can't just build immersive environments for their sake because they're cool. You have to do them to solve a specific problem that requires them. So if you're going to just like, hey, I love the metaverse, or I'm a gamer and I want to do everything in 3D, good luck, because that's still a small section of the consumer public.
And
there's an older generation that doesn't give a crap about that, right? But if it's solving a hair on fire problem that they immediately can tell this will make better, then I think there's an opportunity. So hopefully we're doing that.
That's great that you mentioned it, because people build 3D because it looks cool, and that's the main problem with it. But we're also involved with a few customers of ours who are building digital twins, and that's also very, very interesting, because then they take the real environment, for example, a shop, or in our case, we're working with a Singaporean company who are building a digital twin for an airport in Singapore, and they are kind of trying to make everything 3D there, real time, where every shareholder can see what's going on in the airport. And that's super cool. Yeah. If that becomes a reality, then definitely.
That's it. And I mean, we're using twins as well. And what's really interesting about that is you pair that with AI, and now you start having a spatial intelligence, right? So right now, AI is really doing well predicting what we're going to say or what we want. But AI can also predict what a space wants or needs, right? And the constraints and opportunities that exist in that space. We were talking with a company in Dubai last week that are doing digital twins for big buildings, and being able, well, they're doing an agentic AI for big buildings to optimize for energy use and other things. And having a twin environment allows people to pinpoint exact experiences really easily and democratize what to do about it to a lot of people, because it's a visual experience that many can understand. So I think we're going to see more of that. There's actually an interesting American company that is just coming out of stealth right now called Doji, DOJI. I'm obsessed with them because a lot of the mechanics of what we're doing, they're doing, but with clothing. So they're creating a 3D avatar of you. So you upload like 10 photos of your body, you take photos of your face, it creates a really nice high resolution avatar. And then you can try on any article of clothing on the internet, because they're using Gaussian splatting to take the images, product images of a shirt, a dress, whatever that might be, and rendering it onto your body.
Projecting it onto your body.
Exactly.
That's very, very nice.
Yeah. That's and I think so what that's doing is it's helping people make better decisions. And if you look at the e-commerce world, I always think of it in 3 phases, right? There's the discovery phase, like finding a product you want to buy. There's the decision-making phase, and then there's the purchase phase. So discovery has been absolutely upended by the Gen AI, right? We're searching and we don't need all these filters and, siloed searches anymore. On the payment side, agentic commerce, which has just come out, the SDKs have come out in the past 6-8 months. Now, all of a sudden, we don't need to register and make all these separate payments. The agents are doing it for us. The part in the middle, which is the decision layer, that is the part that's unsolved. Because if you look at shopping on the internet, it's two-dimensional images, two-dimensional text. And then we have to take that information, run it through our brains that operate in 3D space, and put a whole lot of cognitive energy in trying to imagine what we see on a flat screen on our 3-dimensional bodies, in our 3-dimensional rooms, in our 3-dimensional worlds. And that's where BDGS and these other kind of rendering techniques are going to become incredibly powerful, because it's just going to make it easier for our brains to operate and make good decisions. So that's where we're playing, and I'm pretty bullish about that future.
It's really nice. It's really, really nice, and I wish you the best of lucks, because it's not like you're investing into something that maybe will become. And also something which is very interesting is the fact that it has not worked. Anything 3D, VR, AR until now has not really had any kind of success. So that makes it even more
challenging,
inspiring challenging, inspiring, and I can see why you're working on it. So best of lucks.
Thanks, man. Thanks. It's fun to be back in the saddle, but as you know, this is what we do, and I don't know what else I'm gonna do. I can't go kayaking every day. My body can't handle it anymore. So I better do something fun with my time.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very, very much, Gerrit, for being on the podcast. I really appreciated it. It was, for me, it was very fun. I hope it was the same for you as well.
Absolutely, bro. I really enjoyed it. Always happy to do it again, and hopefully at some point soon I will reciprocate and get you talking.
And for everyone who is listening, I'll be putting all the links relevant to Gerrit, his startup. If you have anything public, we'll definitely share in the description of this video. If you liked it, if you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a comment, like it, or subscribe. Thank you, Gerrit. I would love to maybe have a second session in a few months, maybe after your startup has shaped up a little bit better. But
I'd love that.
Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thanks, mate. It was a pleasure.
All right. Take care, man. Have a good one.